So in this talk, I will try to give a basic overview of the beginnings of Islam until today, by starting at the very, very beginning. So the beginning starts at the Arabic Peninsula in today's Saudi Arabia, where the Prophet Muhammad lived around the end of the 6th and early 7th century. And he, according to the Muslim tradition, he received revelations from God when he was 40 years old. So the Prophet Muhammad passed away in the year 632, and he received his revelation while he was meditating in a cave, Hira, outside of Mecca. Mecca is the city where he grew up and where he lived. And when he was 40 years old, he would have met the angel Gabriel, and Gabriel gave him the first verses of the Quran. And this is where Islam starts, because for the remainder of his life as a prophet, he was made prophet by God. From that point on, he would receive verses from the Quran. So the Quran literally means the recitation, al-Quran. And this is meant to be recited by Muslims. So the Quran consists of chapters, and the chapters consist of verses. And over the course of the career of the Prophet Muhammad as a prophet, he would have received verses related to several specific occasions, sometimes just overall rulings for Muslims or teachings about God. So the entirety of the Quran is the product of the Prophet Muhammad's career from the moment he received the first revelation until not long before he passed away. So the Quran was not right away written down as a book. It was initially meant to be memorized by Muslims. So you have to understand, Arab culture at that time, in the 6th, 7th century, was a culture of memorization, an oral culture. So, for instance, poetry played a very important role for Arabs. They would, it was considered a high art to write poetry, and this would be recited and memorized and passed on from generation to generation. So even now today, people still know of pre-Islamic poetry because this tradition of memorization was very important. So the Quran was meant to be recited from the heart. It was not necessarily meant to be written down. And it was only after the passing of the Prophet Muhammad that the so-called companions of the Prophet systematically wrote down everything that they learned from the Prophet, from the Quran, and made it into a book as we have it today. So the Prophet received this revelation, and this happened in a context at the Arabic Peninsula that was mostly polytheistic. So most of the Arabs didn't believe in one God. They believed in several gods, or there was a high God and lower gods. And Muhammad started preaching a very strict monotheism. And this is the very essence of Islam, one could argue, to believe that God is one, a very absolute monotheism, with no space at all for lower gods or people sharing in the rank of godliness. And this strict monotheism clashed very harshly with the polytheism of the Meccan Arabs. So in Mecca was a hub for this polytheistic tradition, and the main leaders of the Arab tribes in Mecca, they actually profited very much from ruling over Mecca, which was also a polytheistic center. So you can imagine this clashed between this was inevitable, that these Arabs clashed with the young Muslim community. So Muhammad started preaching this monotheism, and especially the lower layers of society, they started to convert to Islam. And this posed a very serious threat to the monopoly of power and also the income that came with that power for the Arab tribal leaders. So this came to a point where at some stage the young Muslim community that was being led by the Prophet Muhammad was in serious danger for their lives because the Meccan leaders, they started to realize we have to eliminate the threat to our power. So at some point, Muhammad decided to migrate from the city of Mecca to Yathrib, and Yathrib later came to be known as the city of Medina in today's Saudi Arabia. And Medina literally means city because it's the prophetic city, Al-Madina al-Nabawiyya. So it no longer bears the name Yathrib. Without going into detail, this initially led to several battles between the Meccans and the Medinans. So the city of Mecca and the city of Medina were in outright war with each other at some point. And while the Muslim community kept on growing, this came to a point where it was inevitable that Muhammad would overcome the Meccans, and they surrendered at some point, and Mecca became Islamic from then on. And Islam rapidly spread over the whole of Arabic Peninsula. And at this point, this is around the period that the Prophet Muhammad passed away, and the issue of succession became apparent. Who would succeed the Prophet, not as a prophet, but as a leader to the young Muslim community? And this is, here lay the foundations for the split between the Sunnis and the Shia. Not right away. It's not that from then on we can speak of a Sunni fraction and a Shia fraction, but later on, which I will discuss later, you will see that this political issue of leadership was at the very core of also a theological split. So the four leaders who succeeded each other after the Prophet Muhammad were Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali. And all four of them were from the intimate circle of the Prophet Muhammad. They were close companions. The discussion was over the leadership of Ali, because Ali was both a nephew to the Prophet Muhammad and his son-in-law, because he married Fatima, the daughter of the Prophet. And especially members of the direct household, the bloodline of the Prophet Muhammad, they felt that actually Ali should have been the leader right away, the caliph. And of course, as history shows, he only became the fourth caliph. So there are some political issues there at the core that gave rise to a group that called itself Shi'at Ali, which literally means the party of Ali. And you can already hear in Arabic, the term for the group Shia comes from this split, from this focus on the bloodline of the Prophet rather than the other companions of the Prophet. For Sunnis, all four caliphs who succeeded each other were rightly guided. They were, this was preordained by God, and they are actually, this becomes a theological position that you have to recognize all four caliphs in order of succession. And for the Shia, it becomes more than just political leadership, but also spiritual leadership. And I will get back to that later. So Islam, at that point, as the Prophet Muhammad passed away, was becoming quite strong in the peninsula, and it was even spreading in the two directions where the two superpowers of that time were present, namely the Byzantines in today's Turkey and Syria, and on the other side in the Persian realm you have the Sassanids. And both of these superpowers clashed with the young Muslim community, where under the Caliph Omar, the Sassanids, the Persians, were actually defeated, which was a heavy blow. You have to consider that these were the two superpowers, the Byzantines and the Sassanids. So the fact that this young community was able to defeat them was completely unexpected in history. Also, Syria gets conquered by the young Muslim community, and the Arabs start to settle there in all these, in this historical context where they conquered Persia, and they start to move on towards Central Asia, towards North Africa, and Syria, Lebanon. And the Arabs never force anyone to convert to Islam. They just have these Arab settlements where specific tribes settle, and it's only over the course of several centuries that the local population starts converting to Islam. And interestingly enough, the local population was not necessarily hostile to this Arab takeover, because these communities had lived for a couple of centuries under the rule of the Byzantines or the Sassanids, and they were not always treated in the best way by these two superpowers. So in some way, the Arabs also blew a fresh wind and provided a new way for these communities to develop and remain stable and have a degree of autonomy under Arab Muslim rule. So as this expansion thrives, we also get a very intellectual tradition that starts to evolve from this development, because you have to consider, of course, Islam is a young religion, but Muslims had to preserve what Islam actually taught. What does it mean to be Muslim? How does one practice Islam? So it was inevitable that a scholarly tradition had to emerge for them to preserve Islam and to explain it to the following generations. And this is what happens, especially some 200-300 years after the coming of the Prophet. You see that a very strong scholarly tradition emerges that gives rise to a strong interest in the sciences. So in the first place, the Arabic language, of course, becomes very important, because the Quran is, of course, the revelation for Muslims, and it's written in Arabic. So to understand Arabic correctly, the study of language becomes crucial. On the other side, the study of the oral tradition, especially the so-called ahadith, in singular hadith. These are this is the oral tradition where the sayings and doings of the Prophet Muhammad are transmitted from teacher to pupil, which was initially only memorized, and then after some 200 years, in the 2nd century, definitely there starts a tradition where these hadith texts are also written down massively, and you get hundreds of volumes of these hadith compilations, even until today. And these are also memorized and passed on. And because the young Muslim community understands that hadith has a certain weakness in the danger that oral transmission is very receptive to flaws emerging through mistakes maybe being transmitted, or even hadith texts being faked, not actual being actual authentic traditions, but invented traditions to support a certain opinion of a scholar, for instance, or even a ruler. The young scholarly tradition was very aware of this danger, so they developed a very strong sense of hadith, a systematic way to check the validity of hadith. So this came to be known as the science of hadith, or the sciences of hadith, which focus very much on what a certain hadith text contains, and also the line of transmission of such a hadith. So it checks the people, the individuals present in that line of transmission. So if the Prophet Muhammad said something to Ali, who said something to Ibrahim, who said something to Ahmed, then it checks whether those individuals actually met, whether they lived with each other, whether they had a good memory to memorize hadith, whether they were trustworthy. All these things are part of sort of grading the trustworthiness of a line of transmission of any hadith one can think of. So this becomes part of the scholarly tradition. There also emerges a very strong juridical tradition known as fiqh, a theological tradition, usul ad-din or kalam, more rational theology, a mystical tradition in the form of tasawwuf, Sufism. So all these things, all these sciences develop. Philosophy develops very strongly in this period, as it is also part of sort of of both theology and jurisprudence. So it is also in this context, after the 2nd, 3rd century, that we get the first theological split between Sunni and Shia Islam. So the Sunnis, they hold fast to this idea that the majority of the community is always on the right path. So they follow the four caliphs. They consider that Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali, they were all in the right, and they were rightly guided caliphs, in order to avoid fitna, strife within the community. For the Shia, they believe that the bloodline of the Prophet is not just merely a family line, but also a spiritual line. So they believe that the children of Ali and Fatima, especially Hassan and Hussein, that they had both a worldly authority and a spiritual authority, and that this was passed on within their bloodline. So they call these leaders who are both worldly and spiritual, they call them imams. And the word imam can mean several things, but for them it means the worldly and spiritual leader. And they believe that these imams had an authority over the Muslim community, not just in that they understood the religion in the best way, but also that they had a God-given insight into the deeper layers of the Quran. So they believe the Quran as a book, is a silent book because it no longer speaks. The revelation has ended. The Prophet Muhammad no longer lives, so there's no more revelation after the Prophet Muhammad. But there are actually spiritual insights provided by God, sort of revealed into the hearts of the imams, of the bloodline of the Prophet. So in that sense, the imams are the speaking Qurans. They understand the batin and the zahir. So the zahir is the outward, the exoteric dimension of the Quran, what the words actually mean at first sight. But the batin is the internal, esoteric aspect of the Quran. So they believe that only the bloodline of the Prophet is able to keep on reading the deeper lines of the Quran, the deeper meanings. Now, such a thing to some degree exists in Sunni Islam, but it simply does not hold the same authority as it does in Shi'i Islam. So for the Shia, whether amongst the Shia you start to have a division along the line of which imams are accepted and which not. So you get the Zaydis, who are fiver imams. They accept 5 imams from the bloodline of the Prophet. Then you have the 7er Shia, who are the Ismailis. They accept a line of 7 imams, and some of them actually believe that there's still an imam today. So the line of imams continues. And then you have the 12er Shia, which is the biggest group today, who are prevalent in Iran, for instance. The Imamis, they accept 12 imams, and they believe that the 12th imam has come into occultation, which means that he has disappeared from the outward world, and he's hidden from the outward world until the end of times is near, and then he will return. So for all these Shia, the imams play a crucial role, and especially for the 7er and the 12er Shia, that esoteric understanding of Islam is crucial. With Sunni Islam, we get a different kind of tradition, even though there are very strong parallels between the Shia and the Sunni scholarly tradition. In Sunni Islam, what becomes crucial is following one of the orthodox schools. So especially in the juridical tradition, we see that there are 4 schools. From somewhat the 3rd, 4th century onwards, this becomes sort of the consensus that one has to follow one of these 4 schools. So those are the Hanafi school, prevalent in Turkey today and Central Asia, the Maliki school, prevalent especially in Africa, then the Shafi'i school, prevalent in Yemen, for instance, and Malaysia, in Asia, Malaysia and Indonesia. And finally, the Hanbali school, prevalent today, especially in Saudi Arabia. So you see there's sort of a geographical division of these schools over the Muslim world, and it is believed that most Muslims, whether they know it or not, follow one of these 4 schools. The scholarly tradition in Sunni Islam focuses, one could say, and this is based on a hadith, on 5 pillars of faith when it comes to belief. So the first pillar is belief in God, and this is actually also the first pillar for the Shia. So this is the unity of God, and also the fact that the Prophet Muhammad is his prophet. But when it comes to the pillars of faith, it's first and foremost belief in God, then belief in the angels of God, belief in the books of God, so all the revelations that have come before the Quran also, such as the Psalms or the revelations revealed to Jesus. Then all the prophets that have been sent also prior to Muhammad, such as Jesus and Moses, all the biblical prophets basically. Then the Day of Judgment, and finally belief in foreordainment. So this differs just a little bit from the Shia, who also believe in prophethood, but besides prophethood also believe in this sort of imamhood, believe in the bloodline of the prophet through Ali. So then you could say for the Sunnis, these 6 pillars that I just mentioned are theological pillars that are not really disputed between the different schools. Then there are 5 pillars for acts, which are the Shahadatain, the declaration of faith, believing in God and believing in the prophethood of Muhammad. Then the prayer 5 times a day, the alms, the zakat, paying alms once a year for, amongst others, for the poorer layers of society. Fasting during Ramadan, the Sawm, during the month Ramadan, one of the 12 months in the Islamic calendar, where a Muslim fasts from sundown to sun up, or the other way around, from when the sun comes up until the sun goes down. And finally, the Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca, at least once in a lifetime. So these are the pillars of acts, one could say. So this is, we have the theology, we have the acts that a Muslim is obliged to perform in his or her lifetime. And then finally, you can say there's the spiritual dimension, which is ihsan, which is described in the hadith to worship God as if you see God, and even if you don't see him, he sees you. And this develops in the science of tasawwuf, of Sufism. And in the Shi'i tradition, we have a very similar differentiation, though Sufism is often identified as a very particular Sunni phenomenon, though some Shia scholars have also considered that Sufism is actually simply a part of Shi'i Islam. They also have their own spiritual tradition known as Irfan. So also the Shia naturally have this spiritual dimension. If we consider this differentiation between the exoteric and the esoteric understanding of the Quran, it comes as no surprise that they also have this spiritual tradition. So this is, in a nutshell, the scholarly tradition as it develops. Both the Sunnis and the Shia have their own schools of thought that they adhere to, and which are also geographically divided, one could say. And an interesting thing happens in the modern age, especially in the last 2 centuries, where this scholarly tradition is also seen as facilitating sort of a decline of Muslim civilization. And this has to do also with the culture that comes from colonization, where Muslim scholars felt, how can we be colonized when we have the religion of Islam? And some intellectual movements really believe that this decline of Islam has to do with the fact that the Muslim tradition has been stuck in following this system of the schools, and they need to go back to the original sources and be creative again. So this is a big discussion in the modern world, which is very much influenced also by literacy. You have to understand that in the pre-modern age, outside of the scholarly class, many people were not literate. And today, in today's age, people are not just able to write and read, they also have access to all the main sources. They have access to books, they have access to internet, so they can also interpret all these sources for themselves, which of course clashes with the notion that this is the responsibility of the scholarly class of the ulama. So this is a very modern phenomenon that we see today that is very visible amongst Muslims, and which gives rise to a lot of discussions about authority and the degree to which one can interpret these sources, which I've discussed, the Quran and the Hadith.